click live stream tab or watch us live on your smart TV, YouTube, WCEG network. I'm Dr. Wanzo, your show host of Mind Matters for the next hour. We're part of the worldwide community empowerment group where we speak life into the community. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at WCEG_talk_radio and at WCEG network. Last but not least, the topics and opinions are those of the show host and guest and not WCEG network. Thank you for your continued support. As I said, we welcome you to Mind Matters, where we discuss relevant mental health issues. I'm your host, Dr. Cassandra Wanzo, a psychiatrist in practice in Atlanta for the last 29 years. Our co-host is Mr. Norman Carter Jr. Norm is a retired Philadelphia police corporal. He's written a very informative book, The Long Blue Walk, My Journey as a Philly Cop. It's available on Amazon. I highly recommend that you purchase it. He also hosts his own show on WCEG, Issues and Answers on Mondays. Hi, Norm.
Hello, how are you, doctor?
This evening, we have a very, very special guest. His name is Mr., I want to say it correctly, Daji Kuweza. Did I say it correctly?
That's correct. That's perfect.
Okay. He will give us a unique perspective on Asian, African-American relationships as someone who has lived, studied, and worked in China. Mr. Kuweza holds a BS in journalism and metropolitan studies from NYU. He earned an MBA in international business from Baruch College. Welcome, Mr. Kuweza.
Thank you for having me here.
Our topic this evening is racial violence, racism, and mental health. Last week, here in Atlanta, a gunman went on a shooting spree, killing 8 people in 3 different spa locations. 6 of the people that he killed were Asian women. The shooter denied that there was a racial motivation and said that he was motivated by sexual addiction. He said the spas were a temptation for him and that he wanted to eliminate the temptation. We know that it's impossible to divorce race from the discussion. Since the pandemic, fueled by racist rhetoric from our previous president, more than 4,000 hate-fueled incidents and 5 murders against Asians have occurred. 68% of them have been against women. This represents a 150% increase since the pandemic. Killing Asian American women to eliminate a man's temptations speaks of the history of the fetishizing of Asian women and Asian American women. They have often been labeled as a temptress, dragon lady, lotus blossoms, whose value is only in relation to men's fantasies and desires. Other stereotypes of Asian women are that they're exotic, hypersexualized, and submissive. In the 80s, there was a movie called Full Metal Jacket. I don't know if y'all saw that movie, Full Metal Jacket.
Yes.
And I guess I can say this, but there's a scene where an Asian woman approaches 2 American GIs and repeatedly states, Me So Horny, We Love You Long Time.
Yeah.
These images have been normalized through white supremacy and sexual imperialism. These recent incidents and the spy killings have also sparked discussion in the African American community. On my Facebook page, I saw several posts stating, one of my Facebook friends, this is what she said, I wrote exactly, she said, she's African American, she said, this has been happening to Black folks in this country for over 400 years. There has been no outcry from the Asian community about all of the violent acts against Black people. They make millions in our communities every year. Another Facebook friend posted about the monopoly of Asian beauty supply stores in the Black communities. And she also talked about the racist treatment of Africans in China, being evicted from their places of residences, on the streets, being refused entry to stores, businesses, and being accused of spreading coronavirus. So I'm gonna leave it here and open this up to discussion, whoever wants to respond to this.
Wow.
Huh.
I kind of identify with that one of your writers who talked about the Asian businesses in the community. In Philadelphia, which is my home, in 1964, we had these huge riot, which destroyed the area that I lived, which is North Central Philadelphia. Those stores were predominantly owned by Jewish people. They ran them out. After they ran those out, we had African Americans who tried to come in and get those businesses established, but they just couldn't. They just couldn't succeed. So those businesses left. So they left a big void. So what happened in the late 70s, early 80s, Asians began to come in to these areas and open up these stores. And they were successful. And what happened is we had a Philadelphia DJ, I can call him out, his name is Georgie Woods, very, very popular. He made a statement on his program about how we should not allow these Asians to come into our neighborhoods and take over stores in our neighborhood. As a result of that statement, there was a huge uptake in violence, and up into including murders of Asian store owners or Asian business owners in the North Philadelphia community. And words matter. Yes. And the president of the United States, he engaged in this campaign of assaulting an entire race by words, where he established the China virus. And we see that evidence in the police captain from Cherokee County. Yes. When talking about the man who was been arrested. Here we find out he had Facebook posts with CHYNA, which is the way that Trump pronounced the China virus. And there was a speech made in March of last year where Trump used the word China virus several times, China virus. And when they checked his statement, he had crossed off corona virus and substituted China virus. And he had been warned against doing that, but we know that Trump has engaged in a politics of racism, everything from, you remember, that's my African American?
Right.
Yeah. And so we start the China virus, and since then, last year, there was 150% increase.
Exactly. That's what I
in crimes against Asian Americans.
Right, 150, yes.
Words matter.
Yes, they do. Oh, Mr. Kuweza, your mic, we can't hear you, Mr.
I think he's muted.
Oh.
Hello, is that better?
Okay, yes, great.
Oh, okay. I pushed it by mistake, sorry. The other thing the point the person made, and that was interesting, the sequence of the neighborhoods. I grew up in New York and Brooklyn, And I remember then lived a part in Queens, for those who know the difference between New York. But and I remember where I grew up at, there was mostly Jewish stores. Most of the people there was Jewish stores. Then at some point it transferred out, and actually then it transferred into Arabs, which is interesting too. Arab stores. Then somebody else came along, and then at some point, like I went to the neighborhood I lived in, Flushing, that became, there was a big ontake, and that was probably late 70s, early 80s of Koreans, and they would, in fact, there was a couple of things where people were saying the Koreans had taken over the green grocer whole territory in New York, right? All over New York City. But then it turned out, then the Chinese came later. So like I said, where I lived now is a Chinatown, but you always think, but the thing is with me is I always go like, okay, it'd be good if there was no transition period that I know of that I can remember where you were saying in Philadelphia, you had some point where Black people tried to have their stores. I don't remember that in any particular place in New York. Mostly it always transitioned even in the Black neighborhoods, but there was never a point where we had all these Black people trying to get a store and then they failed out. One thing that's always a problem that we don't try to figure out is anyone who's ever had any kind of business thing, you think about store, just like if you think about a comparison, easy one to compare. Restaurants are tough business, right? There's tremendous competition. You got people come back. Stores in general are like that too. So how do we? You got to compete, and you got to figure out also when we have what we call food deserts and other kinds of like that. But you have all this thing. If I open up a store, it's going to be expensive for me because of that neighborhood. The insurance for that neighborhood for where I'm living is higher, right? Than probably if I'm in some other locations. So it's not an easy thing to do. And that's not the fault of them, for staying, but they managed to figure out how to do that. So blaming the Asians for somehow having a store is not a good thing to me. It makes any sense.
Right.
But one thing I did see, I was looking at something on TV. They had a retake of all the things that Rodney King and everything that happened. And I had forgotten was that there was a case where that led up before Rodney King, where a Korean woman, shot a girl who went to the store to buy something in an argument. The girl put the thing down and was walking out the store, and the woman shot her in the back of the head, right? Which is obviously a murder. I mean, there's no green. But here's what I took when I was looking back. I thought, well, you know what? The white judge, let the woman off.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's what started the whole thing of the anger, right? Because Korea. Because why would you let the woman kill this girl who was doing nothing, walking out the store, and you don't charge her with anything? They refused. So that was also another thing that the model minority.
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that up. Yes.
Gets to be okay, even if she commits a murder, and it was, and this was a white judge. I mean, I don't think that if there was a Black judge, that would have happened. Right. But the white judge is, we can figure it out, forget it, and all that kind of thing, move on. And that contributes to some of the problems we have. But here's the catch, I think, that when these things happen, we got to be careful about saying that it's Koreans who did it or it's Chinese who did it, right? That person did it, but that doesn't mean that represents the whole group of people from that community.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it because Asian, just like the Black community, they're not a monolith. It's not a monolith.
Right. In fact, there's been a pushback in the last, before the killings, well, I guess probably around the same time, before all the stuff with the China flu, there's been a pushback. My connections to the Asian communities here in Atlanta and listening to other people is they also don't know they like Asian American even as a term because they're not sure that they like Asian American as a term. Because there's so many varieties of Asian Americans, right? I tell you, my wife is Filipino. We have other friends I know, kid Chinese. Somebody, another guy who's married, who's State Department guy, who's married to Japanese woman. And then among them, they're not even model because they have Laotians and Cambodians. Those guys, the Laotians and Cambodians, do terrible in school. They're terrible. They don't get PhDs. They're in a whole different category of people, but they're Asian. So you lump them everybody together. They go, well,
right. They're in the spectrum as far as economic achievement as well. So it's not you said it's a myth, this model minority, that they're all successful, all doing well. And it was something that was created to drive a wedge between the Asian American and Black communities. Why it was created.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that one of addressing something that Mr. Kuweza,
yes, sir.
Yeah, that you're addressing is that why now, which I just saw recently, that now you see the abbreviation AAPI.
Yes.
Yeah.
For Asian American Pacific Islanders.
Yeah.
Attempting to be a little bit more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So yeah. I can go on another. I know we're going to go anywhere else with this subject. But
Yeah,
there's a lot of offshoots to this, so we could go. Yeah.
Yes, wherever you want to go.
Well, I do have a list of from the Washington Post that I did a little tiny research on about the long history of anti-Asian racism in the United States.
Okay.
And it starts off with the People versus Hall, which was a murder case in California in 1854. And what had happened, was dealing with the Chinese influx of Chinese immigrants. And what they said was there was a racist troop of Asians coming to steal white jobs. Have you heard that recently? Mm-hmm. And the California Supreme Court reinforced this by saying that Asian immigrants could not testify against a white person in court. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Virtually guaranteeing that whites could escape punishment for anti-Asian violence. And this was a case of murder. 1871, we had following the murder of a white man caught in the crossfire between two Chinese groups, 500 white and Hispanic rioters surrounded and attacked a Los Angeles small Chinese community. Short story, they lynched 17 Chinese men and boys, including a prominent doctor. 1882, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act, which spawned another spike in anti-Asian racism and scapegoating. We had the Rock Springs Massacre in 1885. That was a murder killing 28 Chinese mine workers. Then we had the San Francisco plague outbreak of 1900. The Japanese internment that we all know about in World War II. Mm-hmm. The Vietnamese shrimpers and the KKK that occurred in 1984, where they were trying to drive the Vietnamese. I believe this was in Texas, Galveston.
Yeah, right. I remember that.
Where they were trying to drive them out of their businesses. And there's a lot more. Of course, we know about the 9/11 inspired hatred against both Asians and Muslims, and that was also helped out by the former president of the United States, Donald Trump.
Yes,
who had people believing that Muslims were dancing in the streets.
Wow. Yeah. Now that's a funny side of that. There were places where Muslims danced in the streets,
right?
But it wasn't in the United States, you know.
Right. Exactly.
Catch, you know?
Exactly.
My brother-in-law, he was in Saudi Arabia, and he was talking about there were people parading in the streets, you know, celebrating that kind of thing. So
yeah, that was on television. That was on the news.
Yeah. And
but it wasn't in New York.
Right.
It wasn't in New York, right? So there's a whole. One thing that's always interesting too, you think about, we know more about, well, we meaning Black people anyway, know more about the all the terrible things that have been done to Black people. But the one thing I don't think that most Asians as a group, you know, again, talk about Asians as a group, but as an overall, don't know any of those things you just said about the history of hate, about what happened at different times. It's they don't talk about it, even among themselves. Right. From my impression, you know, they don't mention it, don't talk about it. It's not brought up. So they don't actually think that those things happen. And then I've had people, I tell them that they're surprised, and they're from different countries. They really actually don't know that those things happen. You know, like, why? How come I know? You don't. You know, that kind of thing.
'Cause I know one of the celebrities, I forgot his name, always talks about being, when he was in an internment camp, I can't think of his name, but he always talks about that, being in a Japanese internment camp.
Yeah, the internment kind of comes up, but all the other things don't.
Right.
All the other thing, it was this once upon a time between the Filipinos, the Chinese, the Japanese, everybody, all of them, and especially in terms of California and the West, there were always a period of time when they were basically, their lives were worth nothing. But they don't know that. If you talk to them, someone today, they don't really know. So I don't know. There's nothing to it. I don't know, the woman who wrote on your Facebook, I think, something she said, and I was thinking that, well, one thing that happens, and this, we can kind of move the discussion a little bit another direction, sort of, is that, okay, one thing that happens is these people come in from countries, because even Africans the same problem. They come into countries, they don't want to identify with Black people. That's not a good thing.
Correct.
There's not a plus. There's no plus to that, right? That kind of thing. And so they want to do what they're doing, but that doesn't mean they hate Black people. They just don't. They're just afraid of getting too connected to people who have all these problems. But then the children are different usually, because the children grow up here with for instance, with the Black Lives Movement.
Yes,
I've had people who most of these particular cases, Filipinos, they don't understand stuff, and then I've had them say to me, "Yeah, I was talking to my daughter, and she explained it to me."
Yes,
I was talking to my son. They explained it to me because their whole concept and framework of how they're thinking is different from coming to the country. They became here as adults, but the children grow up here and they go to schools and see stuff and they understand, and they have to explain. Now, I used to produce a newsletter at one point in time called Common Ground. It was about all things happening, and I know that I had influence on some of those Filipino children. Because they were reading, they didn't know that the native Filipinos were Black people. And they were like, really? So I exposed things that they hadn't heard before. And then, they go, hey, Mommy, I heard that, that kind of thing. So, I mean, but it's the whole thing.
More about that? Can you say more about that? The native Filipinos being Black? Can you say more about that?
Say more about that? Well, if you go,
it's not known. It's not.
I'll even make it a little better, very interesting. In 1974, there was something called the Sixth Pan-African Congress. The Pan-African Congresses were held by W. Du Bois, and a guy named George Padmore. It was the first one ever held in Africa. I went to it. I was a delegate. Wow. And what happened is that one thing, that was the first time it was the first time in Africa. And it was also the first time I ever met Africans or Black people from all over the planet. So I met all these Asian Black people I didn't know existed, right? Who showed up from all these places, and they were there. And it was a thing, I'll take a little sidestep later in a second, come back to it. But the idea that you meet all these people who are from other places, and yes, the Filipinos, the native Filipinos are Black people. The native people of India were Black people.
Yes, the Dalits, the Dalits.
Right, all these different places, these people, they each have their own story of what happened as it goes on, why they're not the major population anymore, right? But but it's interesting. The other thing that was interesting about that, which is sort of time maybe, when I went to this conference, it was the first one in Africa. It was sponsored by Julius Nyerere. A lot of the people who helped put it together were former SNCC people from the U.S. And they were talking to Nyerere, and they got Nyerere to do this thing, and he was a wide-thinking, broad person. Did a lot of other great things I'll talk about later. But the fact that actually the United States didn't like the conference idea. Black people getting together to talk from all over the world. Oh no, this is a bad idea. Right? The Russians didn't like it either. And you'll be surprised. The Russians didn't like it because they don't think their whole thing is a class struggle and not about race, right? So they actually were against the thing. The United States actually stopped. I was an advanced person, so I was in Tanzania when this happened, but I was waiting for the delegates to arrive, everybody else, and they got there late. They didn't come in time. What happened? Trying to figure what's going on. The American government, the FBI, went to Kennedy Airport and stopped the airplane. What? From leaving. They said we have criminals on this plane. And everybody said, well, that's fine. You take the criminals off and we'll get all the rest of us to go. We don't know who they are. What do you mean you don't know who they are? Oh. And they stopped the plane. So there was no plane. You couldn't get us. So what happened? All the people in that plane had to get off and figure out the alternative ways to get to Africa for this trip. They couldn't, but that plane was stopped. It was an Air India flight and they stopped the flight. The FBI said, no, this flight can't go. You know, Russians are having it.
Who was president during that time?
1974. Who was president?
Yeah,
it had to be Nixon.
Nixon, okay. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. There was probably Nixon, and so it was just kind of, wild, but the whole thing, everybody disliked it, and even to a while that, I talked about the Iranians supporting guerrilla movements, getting freedom in Africa and all that kind of thing. Some of those guerrilla movements were getting support in Mozambique, especially from the Russians, right? And so they actually got up at the conference and denounced the conference, which was but they had to go because Nyerere is powerful. So they had to be there, and he was their supporter. But they kept saying, we shouldn't have a conference of Black people. It should be a conference of people who from all over, who class struggle and all that kind of thing. Like, what the hell is like Nigeria, and then not Algeria. Algeria's, the Mozambicans, some other people all got up. They were at the conference because they felt they had to come, and they also didn't like the Black people from America were there.
Really?
Wow. Yeah, they weren't too confident of that. Nyerere, as I said, Nyerere was a great man. So he said, no, we're doing this, and you don't like it, you can leave. And so they had the conference, and everything happened. But to say all that too, it's like tying things together. So we have those conflict going on that doesn't make sense. And Nyerere, as I mentioned to Dr. Wanzo in this other conversation, because we can shift it maybe to talk about China and Africa kind of thing. China and Africa and Nyerere and China and Tanzania, especially, there's a fact that the reason that China is in the United Nations is because of Tanzania and because of Nyerere. And so when I went to China, I knew they had a special thing of sorts. When I went to live there in 2016, I had a different kind of perspective than when I was there working in 2014. And I found that all the Tanzanians get special treatment.
In China?
China, yes. The first day I was there, I was talking to this guy from Cameroon, and I was just getting to relay the land and what's going on. And he was talking to me and he said, I said, well, yeah, he said, in this Tanzania. I said, yeah, so where are the Tanzanians? He said, oh, they have their own compound. Oh, really? They didn't live on the campus. They had the Chinese provided them with their own place. They're like their own buildings, that kind of thing. And the reason for that is because Nyerere, starting, I don't know what year it started now, but there was something called the Tazara Railroad and they wanted to avoid going through South Africa, because if the railroad went through South Africa, then the Americans wanted to do that, right? Because the Americans supported the white South Africans.
Right.
Then the white South Africans could control, but by just cutting off the railroad, right? And cutting off the movement of supplies. Today, I read on the news, you saw there's a news where there's a tanker stuck in the Suez Canal, and all the world's commerce going through there, 12% of the world's commerce is stopped, it's frozen. May not be able to move for another week, So that was what they wanted to be able to do to Tanzania, and the Zambia was the other end. So the Chinese said, we'll build it for you. And they said, what? No, you don't want the Chinese to build it for you. Oh, yeah, we do. We'll let the Chinese build it for us. And the Chinese built it. And that established a relationship. And from that point forward, they had a special relationship. So Tanzania set upon helping to China, because in the United Nations, usually the ambassador to the United States, the most important ambassador is the one in Washington, D.C., right, where the capital is, works with the president. But in their case, Nyerere appointed his most important ambassador to the United Nations. His name was Salim. And I met him 73 or 4 or something like that. And so became friends, whatever. And he was, I was still in New York, and he put together a campaign that had brought all the delegates of the United Nations to vote for putting China in the UN, because at that time, Taiwan was in the UN. Taiwan claimed to be representing China. There was no China, they said. They were Taiwan. They were the China. How could you be China? A little island, right? So China. And they said, those people don't exist. We're China. They called themselves the Republic of China. And their sole purpose was to retake China after losing the Civil War. Salim organized people, all the delegates. They came, they had a vote, and they won and removed Taiwan. Right? Now, this is what's funny. the seating arrangement is United Republic of Tanzania in one row, United States behind of the China of the United States of America is behind them. Next row, George Bush was the delegate at the time,
Oh, wow.
right? And he was pissed off because when the vote went through, Salim got up. You can't see me. He does a dance in the aisles, and Salim and George Bush dedicated that he was going to destroy Salim. Yeah. So Salim was supposed to be the first Black African Secretary General of the United Nations, and George Bush said it will never happen. Wow. And this is later, right? Like in the 80s when he was working with Bush was there when Reagan, and he said we're not going to have Salim ever have any position of any value in the United Nations. And all the delegates voted for Salim, and the United States vetoed every delegate for a month. Until they gave up and they made Boutros Ghali the president. He was because Egypt, right, is part of Africa. So,
right.
So they made him. That was a compromise, but they were not going to let Salim be the thing. Salim went on and had a great career. He became the secretary. He went back to became the Secretary of Defense for Tanzania. Then he became the head of the Organization of African Unity, which became the African Union. Then he organized the army that fought and deposed Idi Amin. He did a lot of great stuff. In China, he's honored. They have a big honor for everything for him. His daughter was there in 2016. They gave her a special award, just for her. And the Tanzanians get a special award. And get to this other thing about mistreatments of Africans. It's sort of like I was saying earlier, is that that I have Tanzanian friends who live in Guangzhou, where everybody saw these pictures and they were telling Black people they could go, but they have no problem in Guangzhou or any place else. And I was saying that the problem, like in we were talking earlier, I know about the fact that this whole thing about there's an organized campaign by the United States government, secretaries of state, even more so now, and the new guy, actually it's almost worse under Biden than Trump, but it's to basically put a wedge between Africa and China, and they have all these things they talk about and all this discrimination. All that stuff that went on in Guangzhou with Africans was, the comparison is, we have all these all these Latin Americans come to the U.S. They used to be, I don't see it too much anymore, but they hang out in the corner and they do labor, right? They're to go work in the house or whatever kind of thing. China has 1.5 billion people. They don't need those people. They got plenty of those people who do that. So these guys who go to Guangzhou, what they call a chocolate city, right? Is that they have all these people there to do work, but they don't have a skill set necessarily, and whatever that minor the mill set that doesn't have the uneducated mill skill set, right? Let's say. So there they are, and they're trying to get work, and why they hire you, and you don't have the skill set anyway. And they just are there, and they can't buy. It's not like they can buy things. They think that they're going to go there to buy stuff, send it back to their country. And they don't. Their money's worth nothing.
But what about these pictures we saw of them being evicted on the streets and being displaced from their homes?
That was around the time of the virus, and the virus, everybody was panicked. Nobody really knew what was going on with the virus. So there was a thing where they would go, which we now later we knew something happened, but didn't know. You go to a restaurant, the respiratory thing, right? Remember, like a Legion disease, but they went a hotel thing, or those original people who started getting the virus, the coronavirus, were in ships, right? So it was also spreading through the thing. So you had the Africans who were saying, well, one, I'm not going to get tested. If they get tested, they might find they have it. Two, also, that some of them are illegal. So they're illegal there. If they get tested, they got to come out of the legal shadows. They went to a restaurant somewhere, and these other people got sick in the other part of the restaurant, even though they weren't sitting next to each other. So that spread a whole lot of things, it's a whole lot of stuff involved. So it's complicated. But if you were not in Guangzhou, you didn't have that problem. And although I have to admit, one of the guys I know from Tanzania, he has a shipping business. He runs out of Guangzhou, by the way, which is kind of interesting.
Uh-huh.
But he has a whole different arrangement because I think, as I said, he gets special treatment. So he's a Tanzania. He probably has all these deals. He gets things. He ships stuff from Tanzania or back and forth between Tanzania and China, back and forth. But all of that stuff is basically that kind of basis of problem. It wasn't.
Isn't Guangzhou where the majority of Africans are in China? Guangzhou? Is that the
Guangzhou,
majority?
I would say it's hard to know where the majority are because that's the only place where they're congregated in one place.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, one large community, but they're everywhere. There's almost no place in China you can go where there's no Africans or Black people really.
Okay.
So it's hard to say this, but there's no place where there's like all in one place. So it's like saying they have you're from New York, or say Bed-Stuy or Harlem and that kind of. It's like a particular community of people, large numbers, but there's Black people everywhere. So I didn't live in Guangzhou. I lived in Hangzhou, which was closer to Shanghai, about an hour south of Shanghai, which is off how many hours from Guangzhou? I'm not sure. Probably about 5 hours, maybe something like that, 4 or 5 hours. You know, like a New York to DC trip or something like that. Comparison, you know.
Because officially, China has a no tolerance for racism, a zero tolerance policy for racism in their statutes.
Right.
But I was reading this one article from CNN, and they were talking about different racial incidents that have happened, and they talked about an anti-African protest riot in 1988 in Nanjing.
Oh, I hadn't brought that up, but I was thinking that's important, which gets to the big point of really make. Yeah, that was before Tiananmen Square. There was a big riot. I have a friend here in Atlanta who actually was a Black person who was living there at the time.
Okay.
And I was reading some of the stuff, and then I asked her later, what my perception, what my interpretation of what I was reading, right? Trying to see if I understood things, what was going on. And so, because the reason I brought that up with her was because I read something that made me think. I read it and said, "Wait, am I reading this right?" And it had to do with the fact that somebody, in this case, there was someone was going to a bus. I think he was in Beijing, but it may not have been. And they were congregating the Chinese, and they let her, Black woman, they let her through and get onto the bus because she was a Black American. Okay. And they were distinguishing between Black Americans and Africans. Part of what goes on, even now, to some degree, I guess, Guangzhou kind of thing, is that they don't have racism in a sense. They have, I don't know what you call it, association with them. I don't know. Yes, I'm trying to, there's no real word at the moment, but they're associating you not on the basis of your color, but what your origin is. So a Black person from America is treated one way, and a Black person from an African country is treated another way. Because in their mind, and you might think of it again, looking at people's view from their view, African Americans are well accomplished people.
Okay.
And so they see us, and I didn't think about this till I was there. Like I said, I went to a movie. Remember the movie about the women who were instrumental to NASA?
Yes.
I forget what it's called now, but I watched that with some Chinese people, right? See, in their mind, well, dang, come on, those Black people are pretty good. I mean, that's really how they're thinking of it. Those Black people are fantastic. Look at that.
Right. Figures. In fact, someone has asked a question: how were other Africans other than Tanzanians treated in China when you were there?
Well, I'm saying I think that they seem to be okay as long as they weren't abused. As long as they were not in Guangzhou. So it depends. One of the things the Africans have a better skill, have a greater deal with that a lot of other people there, and I saw a comment somebody recently. I'm on social media, Chinese social media too. The guy was saying something about there was somebody who asked a question about speaking a Chinese dialect, which is where I was at in Hangzhou. Each place has its own dialect, even though the Mandarin is the main thing. They have things. So, and he was saying, making fun, and he said something like, "I don't know, I can ever learn that, but the African guys, they seem to pick up everything." And I thought about it. I said, I would say, because those guys, one thing that Africa has, it has, like I said, like Tanzania, Kenya, whatever. They have 100 different groups, and They don't necessarily speak all the group, but they have
Right.
they have a lingua franca called Swahili, which is the origin of my language, right? That I chose to use. But they ear. So like people, for instance, Chinese is a tonal language. There's 4 tones for every word, which makes it difficult. So the Yoruba has, I think, 5 tones.
It's tonal as well. I studied Yoruba in college. It's
I
tonal
think it
as
has
well.
5 tones or something. I'm not
I
sure.
don't remember, but I studied in college, but it's tonal as well. Yeah.
It's tonal. So they pick up Chinese very easily, actually, because their ear, even if there's different tones, they can hear the actual tone. I couldn't hear the tones. That would be. So I would say something to give you an example. The word ma, M-A, let's say in our writing. So ma, right? Ma has 4 different meanings. Ma can be a question. Ma can be a horse. Ma can be what else? Something else. And then the last one is a curse word. You say it wrong, and the person goes, "Curse me out." No, I wasn't cursing you. I didn't.
In fact, in this article, they posed a question. They say, is Chinese racism the same as Western racism? And they give some examples of some incidents. So in 2009, they said an African Chinese contestant on a Shanghai TV show said received a barrage of internet abuse because of her skin color. And they felt that was, well, they denied that it was racism, but but she did receive, it said, the insults based on her skin color.
I think I remember. I wasn't there, but I think I remember hearing about that thing. I think I would interpret that maybe to say that there's 2 things. They do have a problem. Well, I should say this. It depends upon age. It's just like I said about the Asians who come to America. You get differences, but depending on how old they are, where they new here. So a lot of Chinese, I think older ones, for instance, they used to insist upon if I went as a teacher, which I did in 2014, they would insist they wanted a teacher who was white, right? They would say that, and I've seen every now and then somebody say something. Because there was a period of time when a teacher who went to China, or usually weren't a teacher, just being white, you could automatically get a job teaching because you were a white guy, so you must know English better than everybody else. And the black person, they go, we don't want a black person. He doesn't know enough English well enough to. But the government said that was stupid. The government said we're not doing for this. So the government set in a list of policies that said that's wrong, and they said we're not going for that. You're not going to do that anymore. So now, if you're looking for a tutoring job and you talk to some old Chinese person, that's still probably true. They want their child, but younger Chinese, or I would say younger. When I say younger, probably 40. Let's say 40 and younger. They don't care. They're not. They're more worldly. They don't care about the color. Really, they don't at all. They decide if you are someone they think is interesting or not, or they like, or whatever. Like I said, and also if you're an American, American black, it's like, wow, okay.
Well, I know I've had some family members, like we talked about this earlier, who've gone there to visit, and they said that the people came up and touched their hair and their skin. These are some of my family members who visited there.
Yeah, but that's not. I think so. That's curiosity. I was sitting on the subway one time, and this little girl sitting next to me, and she starts touching my hand, right? And then the mother looks like, she was never. Looked at me, and I said, no, it's okay. She's curious. She's just curious, touching to see my skin. Oh, his skin feels like a normal skin, right? So it's curious. Even touching your hair, I don't have much hair anymore, but they touch your hair and that kind of thing. But they're not. They're not mean. They're not trying to. There's no bad thing. They're just trying to. It's a curiosity, that kind of thing. And I will tell you, there's also there's. Oh, and back to the thing you talked about the 1988 riots. I didn't get really finished it. Was that the thing that also was a problem that is not really a problem anymore. But I had this conversation with a couple guys from Cameroon about this. Was that in 1989, 88, whatever it was, there was a problem because first of all, China was very different, right? They didn't have the kind of richness and wealth that they have now. And there was some resentment that these guys from Africa, it was Africans who were coming over and staying, and they were getting good treatment and nice places to stay and all that kind of stuff.
Right,
And the local
right.
students weren't getting that.
Right.
And they,
It would be 8 Chinese students, but the Africans would have their own room. Why was that? Why did they have their own room? And the Chinese were like 8 room. It's what the article said. So why was that?
this is you're talking about 89 or 88?
Yeah, no, back in 88, those riots, right? There was some justice. The Chinese were 8 room, and they would have their own room. Why was that?
Well, I think they would treat, because the Africans would treat, it's like in the United States, people do this because we have foreign students coming because they want to give the United States a good opinion of the United States, right? And so the Chinese doing the same thing. They bring these guys over, they want to have a good experience, and they're going to go back to Africa, and they can talk to them later as people they have contact with. That's the point. That's the reason we have international exchanges. It's not because of the goodness of the heart of the country involved. They invite these people over who they think might be future leaders, and so that's why they're there, and they're treating them well. But the other part of that was they were impregnating Chinese women and leaving.
Yes, it was right. That was right. Yeah. Yes.
That was why they had to. That's why
they had to. Exactly.
Because they were pissed off about the Chinese guys.
Exactly.
That was the cause of the 88 thing.
Right. Exactly. You get it.
That's one of my Cameroon friends would tell me that still goes on to some degree. Not a lot, but it still have. There's cases where he knows. He was telling me in conversation. He said, some of these guys, they drug the women and then they have sex with them. That kind of thing. Some of the
African students were saying? The African students?
Yeah, African guys, and this African guy telling me this, he was explaining some stuff to me, we were just having, he and I talking, that conversation. And he was saying that still happens, but not like before numbers or anything like that. So that's all part of the problem too. But I was about to say that there's still freely relationships between African men and Chinese women. There's even Chinese men who have African women as boy girlfriends, so again, it's age grouping of some sort and exposure, that kind of thing, where it goes on. So, they're just open. So they're open to it. But the older ones are kind of like, they still seen the Stephen Fetchit movies, right?
Speaking of that,
that's how they relate to
right in the same
but everybody else
article,
doesn't.
right in the same article, they talked about when they were celebrating Chinese New Year, then the people were dressing up in blackface, but they didn't see anything wrong with it. And there was a lot of outrage about them, wearing blackface for a Chinese New Year celebration for some skit that they were doing.
Oh, for a skit. Yeah, I was going to say, because that's like I was telling you, there was a skit recently I saw on Facebook, a guy, some European country, where they're impersonators, right? So we have Elvis impersonators here, right? Doing kind of, and so somebody did an impersonation of somebody like Diane Carroll, whoever it was, a black singer or whatever. They had a black face. To them, that's how they see that. It's just an impersonation. It's not like it's not close. See, the one of the things that happens is with Black Americans, like, when I talked earlier about learning things and seeing things through other people's eyes, they don't see it through the same eyes that we see it because they don't have that experience. So they don't see it. That if I put a black face and I'm insulting anybody, I'm impersonating so.
And then the same article, the same article mentioned, it's a 2016, a Chinese detergent maker sparked national outrage over the advertisement that showed a black man being washed white in order to woo an Asian woman, and the spokesman for the company said the Western media was being too sensitive. So
I like that. I love that. That's one of my favorite ones. I said there's a organized campaign by the American government to play all these silly things. That's the silliest argument of all. Because it's what it is. What happens is this: like she's selling soap, right? She puts him in this washing machine, and then he comes out. He doesn't come out white. He comes out Chinese, right? So now, how does that make any sense? First of all, who could fit in a washing machine?
Exactly.
I mean, they're making fun. You think about, we have some of the Sulis commercials in America like that, right? I think doesn't make any sense. So to them, that's funny. Okay, we stick him in the washing machine, and then we pull him out, and now he's Chinese. He's no longer black. He's Chinese. Oh, come on, it's a joke. Nobody takes that seriously. It's like this. I've seen lots of commercials where I like the commercial so much, but I have no memory of what they actually were selling.
Exactly.
It's just silly, but people make that like that shows that's our sensitivity. That's ridiculous. that shows that they're racist. Not really. That shows they're having fun. That's all that was. There's other people took other ones like that too. So that's just, I like that one because it always comes up. I was laughed.
So he comes out Chinese, not white. Okay.
Yeah, he came out Chinese from one. Right, he didn't come out white. And it's just they have their product is so good that it cleans everything, even the skin. Even your skin. And then here, look at this. We don't think about this. Skin whitening. We do that here in America.
Yep.
And in Africa,
all over.
Right. That's what they're saying. In Africa, it's a big thing too.
Right. Speaking of Africa, I wanted to talk about some. I have a friend she's African American. She went to Gambia last year to visit, but got stuck there during the pandemic. So now she's decided to stay. But she sent me a video of a store in the Gambia that's owned by Chinese, and they will not wait on Blacks. She actually sent me the video. She's there at the counter with her items, and they totally ignore her. And she says it's a Chinese store, and there are other places in African countries where Chinese have restaurants where they don't allow the Native Africans to enter. So what's that? Isn't that not racism?
I think that I don't know what's going on, but that's a fault of the country. That's the fault of Gambia allowing that.
Gambia allowed it.
They should allow that to happen. So I mean, that's not she can play. And he's like, I always think that there's a guy who there's some you can't believe. I'm trying to figure out the easiest way to say it. If you can find a Chinese person who does something wrong, you can't say that's China.
Right.
Right, that Chinese guy is doing wrong, and so the government of Gambia or Nigeria or whatever other country, right? It should be that they should be able to force the rules that say that you can't do that. You think about this thing that they had in China, where they said they wouldn't allow the people in the restaurants.
Right.
The government of China interfered on that. They wouldn't let them do that. They said no, this is not legal. You cannot do that. And they had to stop it.
They did.
Yeah. So that's what it's the government in China, whatever African government it is. It's their responsibility to do that if somebody wants to do that. I think though there's also a weird kind of thing that human beings do, which is that they tend to want to associate with people who are why they wouldn't serve you, I don't understand. But they congregate together. So you get a bunch of people who speak Chinese. One other thing I found out, I've got them on my Facebook page. I found it by accident somehow. There's a big contingent of Chinese living in Georgetown, Guyana, which I didn't know. Who would have thought about that, right? And so I made connections with some of them and things like that. And they're doing stuff, but who knows? I'm sure they're probably a really small group of people compared to Georgetown, Guyana. But I see on their Facebook page they have their interaction with all these other people, the black Guyanese and the Indian Guyanese and the whatever. And what people don't know or pay attention to is that in all of these Caribbean countries, there are Chinese in almost every Chinese, every Caribbean country who are the black people who are Chinese.
Right, exactly. Yes.
Right. Yeah. I've no
Jamaica. I know a guy from Jamaica. Last name is Kong, K-O-N-G. He identified as African American, but he appears Asian from his appearance. His last name is Kong.
Right. And I went out of my house the other day and I saw this girl I hadn't seen before, and she was obviously a black person. I didn't get the chance to. I was driving up, and then she waved and went by. She was a black person, but she had all the features of an Asian person. But her skin was black, which I guess I don't know how much time we got to keep talking. So I'm going to tell you.
Well, we're definitely going to have to do part 2. But somebody did, when I was saying earlier about the celebrity that was in the internment camp, they said it was George Takei, right? Who was in an internment camp.
Yeah.
On Star Trek. So something I wanted to say about the internments. While the Japanese were there, they ended up getting reparations for being in the internment camp. So.
Well, the difference is, of course, the numbers are so small, nobody cares.
That's correct. Big difference.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because at the same time, there's a Zoom meeting that I wanted to attend, but they just announced it just before the show that they were doing on a coalition of Japanese Americans and African Americans to push for reparations for Black Americans.
Really, African Americans?
Right, and it was a Japanese organization that was in solidarity with.
But that'll never happen. I have a friend who believes that too. It'll never happen. It's too many people.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's too many people. It's never going to happen. Nobody, and also you haven't figured out who's going to pay? I mean, so
Okay.
what about the people who are Black who are here who are not descendants of slaves? Are they going to pay?
That's always my argument. Same thing.
It's the Japanese American Citizens League, who in combination with some African Americans, they're having a meeting this evening to talk about reparations. But what I wanted to say, you see, the city of Evanston, Illinois, they're instituting reparations. Evanston, I don't know if you heard about that.
Yeah, I did. But you know what? That's almost a false narrative, because what's that doing is they're giving grants to purchase houses. I think up to $400,000.
$25,000 to buy homes or to do home repairs. But you had to have lived in Evanston during the time that they had the redlining. Your family had to be living in Evanston during that time. So you had to prove that your family lived in Evanston during the time that there was redlining.
The only problem I have with that, and this is, we talk about, I know this is far off the subject, when we talk about reparations, nobody, and absolutely nobody, can say who is paying for it. Number one.
Well, the one in Evanston is from the sales from the cannabis sales.
But we're talking that nationally now.
Right. Okay, I'm saying Evanston. That's the basis.
Who's paying for it, and who gets the money?
Right.
Who gets the money? Because every Black person in America is not a descendant of slaves.
True. Yes.
Right.
So who gets that? So what that's going to do is that's going to cause a whole bunch of infighting. But first of all, here is the ridiculous part of that. What you're saying when you say reparations, we are a country of, by, and for the people. So you are paying for your own reparations. And how much sense does that make?
Well, I'm not sure where, like I said, but in Evanston, they're using it from cannabis sales.
Correct.
Right.
But do you charge for reparations? Do you say, okay, only white people are going to pay for the reparations and give it to Black people?
There's a bill. I'm not familiar. HR 40 is what they've shown. That's what they're discussing. So I don't know the particulars of the bill. I'm going to look it up. But HR 40 is the reparations. HR 40 is the bill.
I agree with Brother Kuweza. That it'll never happen.
It never happens. It's gonna never happen. It's logistically impossible.
It says, but it's HR 40.
It just can't happen.
HR 40. I'm gonna have to read the details of it.
It's a wild dream, you know.
Yeah.
Hey, if I ever come back and reincarnated, I'll still be good. They'll still be talking about it.
Well, you know, we're definitely going to have part 2. There's so much that we haven't even touched on. So, you know, we definitely want to do part 2 in 2 weeks. I hope that you're available, Mr. Daji.
I'm available. I can all kind of, like I say, all kind of stories I can tell you about. I told you.
We will continue this in 2 weeks. Let's see, any other questions from the audience? Not that I can see. I think we
didn't generate enough questions. Does that mean nobody?
Well, we did.
Be more controversial.
No, I mean, someone we did get some questions, so we did.
Once this gets out on YouTube,
wrote a question. They said somebody had questions. They went out to Japan. Everybody wanted to touch her daughter. I don't know.
Right. That's what I said. Yeah.
I don't know what that's referring exactly to. Whatever.
Wow. But so this has been, like I said, a very interesting discussion, and I think we'll, end it here so we can continue in 2 weeks to deal with. Oh, she said we got more comments and questions. So we're going to talk more about the relationship between the African American community and the Asian American community and impacts on mental health, and because one thing I wanted to talk about was this book called The Sum of Us, where she talks about how racism has impacted everybody and has an economic toll on all of us, called The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. I'm reading that book now, suggested by a friend. So there's really, so much to talk about. So I want to thank all of our participants, co-hosts, panelists. We will take this up in 2 weeks, and I wish everyone a very blessed week, and we will see you back Wednesday, into whatever the date is, I'm not sure, 2 weeks from today at 6 p.m. to continue the discussions. Please come with any comments and questions that you would like to discuss. Again, thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Network, part of the Worldwide Empowerment Group. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.